This is Viewpoint.
Welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Doug Petcash. The November 8th general election is now just over a week away. Voters across Idaho will head to the polls to decide on who they want to represent them in key federal and state offices. Here on Viewpoint, we've been focusing on some of the big races this year, including the race for U.S. Senate, Lieutenant Governor, and now Idaho Attorney General. Last week, Democrat Tom Arkush was our guest on Viewpoint. The Boise attorney with 44 years of legal experience laid out why he's running for Attorney General and his view on the role of the AG. You can watch that full interview and the interviews on the other races right now on KTVB.com under the Viewpoint tab. My guest today is Republican candidate for Idaho Attorney General, Raul Labrador. The former congressman is an attorney who served 2 terms in the Idaho House of Representatives and 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives as the congressman representing Idaho's 1st Congressional District. He defeated 5-term incumbent Attorney General Lawrence Wasden in the May Republican primary. Labrador lives in Eagle with his wife, Rebecca. They have 5 children and 2 grandchildren. Early voting is underway in several counties across Idaho. Early voting locations in Ada County include Boise City Hall, the Ada County Elections Office, Meridian City Hall, and Eagle City Hall. The mobile voting unit will also be at various locations ahead of Election Day. In Canyon County, early voting will take place at the Canyon County Elections Office in Caldwell. In Elmore County, you can vote early at the Elmore County Courthouse. In Payette County, at the County Clerk's Office, and Adams County at the courthouse as well. Early voting runs through November 4th. And for more early voting locations, absentee ballot information, and what is going to be on your ballot specifically, you can text the word VOTE to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614, and we'll send you a link. Today, I'm going one-on-one with Idaho Attorney General candidate Raul Labrador. Congressman, first of all, thank you for being here today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time. First off, just why are you running for Attorney General?
You know, if you remember the last 2 years during the pandemic, we had a bunch of things happening in the state and nationally that I thought were concerning to me as an individual and to me as a former elected official, where I started realizing that the state of Idaho was shutting down businesses, was shutting down churches, was shutting down schools. They were allowing mandates to happen in the state, things that I never thought would happen in the state of Idaho. And I started looking at those things and asking the question, why is this happening in Idaho? Because we're not Washington, we're not Oregon, we're not California. We're a pretty independent state. We're a state where we let people make decisions for themselves. And I started realizing the Attorney General's office was giving bad legal advice to the elected officials in the state and giving bad legal advice about what we should be doing in the state. And I just thought, I'm the right person for this office at this time.
So what is your philosophy, your vision for the type of Attorney General you will be? What do you believe that role is?
So I want to fill the Attorney General's office with intelligent, conservative, aggressive attorneys that understand that their role is to represent the people of Idaho and not the bureaucracy of Idaho. For 30 years, we've had an Attorney General's office that thinks that their role is to legally justify whatever the bureaucracy wants or whatever the elected officials, especially the statewide elected officials, want. I don't think that's the job of the Attorney General. I think our founding fathers in our state realized that you needed an Attorney General who was a separate individual, who was not appointed by the governor, was not appointed by anybody else, but who was duly elected by the people of Idaho so he could stand up or she could stand up and defend the rights and the liberties and the freedoms of the people of Idaho.
Constitutionally speaking, though, doesn't it say that the Attorney General is basically the attorney for the state, that the state,
it's the attorney
leaders
for the state,
are the client?
But who is the state? It's not the leaders. The people of Idaho are the state. That's what our Constitution says. It says that the state is there to provide for the freedom and liberty of the people of Idaho. So it's not, that's totally wrong. That's anyone who says that the Attorney General is supposed to be just a bureaucrat's attorney does not know how to read the Constitution, does not know how to read our statutes. Now, we have to give legal advice to those entities, but our legal advice should be based on what the limits of the power of those different agencies and the different elected officials is. It's not to justify more power, it's to make sure that we put a check on the power of the state.
What do you mean when you say the liberties and the freedoms of the people of Idaho?
So look at what happened during the pandemic when people were being arrested for going to church It's a fundamental First Amendment right that you have to exercise your religion. An attorney general should have stood up and said, this is not right. This is not legal. This is not constitutional. And there's example after example where our state decides to promote things that maybe the Constitution doesn't allow or the statutes don't allow, and I think the Attorney General should stand up and defend those things.
Last week on this show, your opponent, Tom Arkush, says that you don't see the office as a law office, but as an activist political office. How do you respond to that?
Well, it is the largest law office in the state, and we're going to have the best lawyers in the state work for our office. What he has a problem because I think like 7 times, I can't remember how many times, he kept calling me an extremist. Since he doesn't really have an agenda, since he doesn't really have anything specific to say about me, he keeps using these terms about extremism. And that's really dangerous, to be calling your political opponent extremists, because that leads to violence, it leads to other things. Look at what happened in Florida just this week. There was a young man knocking on doors for Marco Rubio, and he got beat up. He got beat up pretty severely because he was told that you don't belong in this neighborhood because you are campaigning for an extremist. And you would think that that wouldn't happen here in Idaho, but guess what? That happened just yesterday in Idaho. Not the same extreme, but I have a good friend who lives in the North End, and he has a big sign of Labrador in front of his house. The reason he has a big sign is because he had 4 little signs that were stolen every single night. So he decided to put a big sign. He was standing in front of his house with his baby, and an old couple came up to him, and they told him, I can't believe you're supporting this gentleman. Don't you know where you live? Don't you know that we don't support people like him in this neighborhood because he's a criminal? That's what they told him yesterday. And last night in his home, they came and they vandalized his home. They actually smashed all his pumpkins, and they tore down the garden of his wife.
I was going to ask you about this later, but you brought up the issue of feeling safe in Idaho. I've heard from people in the LGBTQ community about rhetoric, some of the measures that have gone through the state legislature here, that they don't feel safe in Idaho. What would you do as Attorney General to make sure they feel safe?
I want every person in Idaho to feel safe. I want every person in Idaho to understand that if anybody violates any law, whether it's somebody that I agree with or I disagree with, that I will protect them, because that's what I have done. That's what I did as a congressman. And I think, if you remember when I was in Congress, we had a great constituent services office. And our constituent services office would represent and would help anybody regardless of their ideology. In fact, my favorite calls in our office were people who said, I didn't think he was going to help me because I didn't vote for him, or I'm not a Republican. We help everyone across the board, and I think that's the duty of any elected official, is to make sure that they make sure that the laws that are in the state, they're applied equally to every single individual. This is where my opponent and I disagree, because he thinks that he's only going to enforce the laws with which he agrees with. I'm going to enforce all of the laws of the state of Idaho, and that's what my office will do.
And the Supreme Court ruling about legalizing gay marriage kind of ended some of the conversation about adding the words here of sexual orientation and gender identity. Do you think that adding the words to the State Human Rights Act would also help that community feel safer?
I don't think it's necessary, but it's not something that I will have to do as an Attorney General. I won't have any role in setting policy for the state. My job is to enforce the policies that are passed by the duly elected representatives of the state.
I just want to go back one more time to your view on the role of the Attorney General. And on your website, you say you'll defend Idahoans' individual liberties, fight back against the Biden administration's failed policies, and ensure conservative legislators have a true partner in the Attorney General's office. Would that make you an activist, AG, if you're focused on the conservative lawmakers?
But you missed the first two. That's not the only thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to ensure that everyone is protected. But I will make sure, right now we have a problem in the state legislature that state legislators try to pass legislation. And remember, conservatives, a lot of these people that are calling me and others extremists, they're talking about legislation that passed by super majorities in the House and the Senate. So I'm talking about super majorities in the House and the Senate that I'm going to be working with. But I'll work with any legislator. But the reality is that these legislators don't feel like they have a partner. And by partner, I mean somebody who's going to work with them to advance, to draft the legislation in a way that it can be defended in the courts. So think about a private lawyer, just a regular lawyer. If the legislature is my client, which they are, and they come to me and they ask me, what do you think about this draft of legislation that I just put together? And all I say to them is, well, it's unconstitutional. Am I being helpful to them? Am I being a partner to them? I'm not. But if I say, actually, the way you drafted it is problematic, but if you draft it a different way, if you tell me, share with me what you're trying to accomplish, if you draft it a different way, then I can defend it in the courts. That's what I mean by being a partner.
And let's talk about that in the sense of Idaho's abortion laws.
Correct.
As you know, of course, the Justice Department challenged the strict new trigger law, which provides exceptions only when an abortion can be performed to prevent death or when a survivor can provide a police report of rape or incest to police. And the federal judge recently issued a partial pause on the law when it conflicts with the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, so doctors won't face, criminal charges in the instances as. And the judge said that the law lacks clarity for providers to be able to perform. Doctors all across the state raised the issue of what do we do in a case of ectopic pregnancy, life of the mother, health of the mother, and partial miscarriages. Do you think the way the law is written, that in a legal opinion, that lawmakers should come back in January and clarify it so there's no gray area, kind of rewrite the law and resubmit it?
So I'm not going to give you the legal advice that I'm going to give the legislators before I even talk to them. But what I can tell you is that ectopic pregnancies, all these examples that have been used by doctors, they're issues where they wouldn't be prosecuted under the law. An ectopic pregnancy is not even an abortion. An ectopic pregnancy is it's a medical procedure because the fetus is not viable anymore. So that's not even an abortion. So for any doctor to say that this law would not allow them to treat an ectopic pregnancy, they're not really telling you the truth. They're not really dealing with the reality that there's not a single prosecutor in the state of Idaho who would prosecute a case like that.
And that's true, I guess, but they want the clarity in the words.
Yeah, but every example that they used, it's actually clear. The words say if the life of the mother is in jeopardy. It's clear. It could not be more clear than that. And the reality is that Judge Windmill made a bad decision because in the state of Idaho, we have to deal with Judge Windmill in the Ninth Circuit, but in the Fifth Circuit in Texas, a similar law was found to be constitutional. In fact, the judge said that EMTALA had nothing to do with this, that there's nothing in EMTALA that requires abortions to be provided by any physician. We all know that if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, that what the proper medical procedures would be, and that would not be considered an abortion by any prosecutor, by any legislator, by anybody in the state. And I think that's one of the problems that we have in the state is that our own Attorney General's office agreed with the DOJ. They stipulated that the law was unclear and that that a doctor would not know. And I think that was a very bad legal analysis from the Attorney General's office.
And with that, we're going to take a break right now. And when we come back, more of my conversation with former Congressman and Idaho Attorney General candidate Raul Labrador. We'll be back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to Viewpoint. Today we're focusing on the race for Idaho Attorney General. I'd like to welcome back in Republican candidate and former Congressman Raul Labrador. Sir, first of all, Republicans here, of course, have a massive majority in the state House and the state Senate, but there are pretty solid divisions within the Republican Party itself.
Correct.
Do you have any concerns, if elected, in being able to work with the legislature?
No, actually, I will have an opportunity to work with the legislature in a way that the current Attorney General has not been able to, because I have a lot of friends in the legislature. I was there for 4 years. I was able to serve with them. And I understand, I think what makes me uniquely qualified for this position is that I understand the mindset of a legislator. We had a tendency in the current Attorney General's office where they would just kind of dismiss the concerns of legislators, and they didn't really understand the thought process that you have to go through to write legislation. And I think most legislators, if not most legislators, are pretty excited that I'm going to be the Attorney General, because they know that I think like they do. I understand how difficult it is to get ideas on paper, and they're looking forward to having me work with them.
Straightforward question here. School vouchers, legal or not constitutionally?
Well, vouchers is a political term that the left keeps using. What has been tried in the state of Idaho is money following the child. And it is constitutional, because the U.S. Constitution has said that if you are going to allow money to follow the child to any private school, it will also be allowed to go to a religious school. Now, the question is whether the legislature decides that that's the policy of the state. But if they give it to any private entity, they have to give it to religious entities as well.
Do you anticipate that you'll be taking up that issue if elected?
I'm assuming that there's going to be some bills, and there's going to be some bills that are going to be better drafted than others, and I'm going to try to make sure that they do it in a way that is constitutional, can be constitutionally defended. But that's up to them to decide whether that's a policy they want to follow or not.
So again, if elected, you talked a little bit about staffing and the types of lawyers that you would hire. Will you keep attorneys already on staff? Will you
absolutely.
keep the staff? I mean, how are you looking at
There's
the staff?
120 attorneys and 100 staff. I can't go in and fire everybody, because there's a lot of really good lawyers in the office. And I've learned in government that there's some people that are ill-equipped to do a job. But there's also a lot of people that are ill-trained, that they're really good people that have good skills that haven't been trained properly to do the job. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify, which I think is going to be the vast majority of the lawyers, that have not been receiving the proper training to be better lawyers in the office. And I'm going to increase the level of professionalism in the office. I think you'll see in a year that most people who are scared right now about me coming in, they're actually going to be very happy that they are working for me, because I'm going to bring a new enthusiasm, a new culture to the office. I'm going to bring a new kind of discipline that actually makes people excited about working. Government work is hard. You're not working for a lot of money, so you need to have the right vision and the right mission so you can be excited about what you're doing every day.
And your opponent and others have said that their concern is that you would clean house, bring in only conservative attorneys who agreed with your political philosophy.
I've never said that. My opponent has a very difficult time listening to what I say. And in fact, what he does and all his supporters do is that they misquote and misstate what I say. Time and again, they have misquoted what I have to say, because, again, like I said earlier, they don't have anything against me unless they twist the words that I have said. I have never said that, and I'm not planning to do that.
One of the things that has been, it gets a lot of news coverage, and it's a big part of the current Attorney General's office, and that is the focus on scams and consumer protection and business protection efforts, and going after corporations for those the settlement monies. Will you keep that unit, or however you want to describe it, as a robust thing in your office if elected? Absolutely,
and I want to increase the reach that they have, because what we do is we concentrate now in Idaho on large things that they don't really bring money to the individual. They bring maybe a little bit of money to the state, or a lot of money to the state. And I want to continue to do those things, but I also want to make sure that we're protecting individuals. If a person is being scammed by somebody, or there's some sort of consumer protection issue where an individual needs to be protected, the good attorneys general throughout the United States are actually also doing the work that is necessary to deal with the individual, not just with the big corporate fights that are happening out there.
And so sometimes major state office holders have a passion project, if you will, or an area that they really want to focus on. Do you have a specific thing, or is it going to really depend on what comes to you from the legislature and other measures?
I think it's going to depend on what comes to me. However, I am very intrigued that the Attorney General's office has an internet unit about crimes against children, you know, the ICAC unit. And that's something that it's very dear to me. I've seen the harm that the internet can do to people. I've seen how people have been abused through the internet and how children have been exploited. And I think that's something that I'm going to be working on really closely and I'm going to be looking at.
Well, you mentioned the legislative services that your office provided when
Correct.
you were a congressman. Do you see something similar to that where people can call a AG hotline for, hey, I think I might have gotten scammed? Will you be putting out
Correct.
scam warnings?
I want to do that. I want to put out scam warnings, but I also want people to feel free to communicate with the Attorney General's office if they think they have an issue with a government agency or with something where they're not being treated fairly. I want to be able to listen to the people. I can't solve every problem that people have, but sometimes it's just good to have somebody who's listening and who will tell you, you know, maybe our office can't help you, but we can send you to the right office that can help you, just to provide information. You know, I don't want to overwhelm my staff, but I want to make sure that we're actually a public service-oriented office. Sometimes it's been a little bit too closed down for the public.
We just have a little bit of time left, but I'm wondering, just on the lighter side of things, campaigns can be pretty rigorous.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying it? Is it exhausting? How's that for you?
I'm actually having the time of my life. The last 2 months, we have been working really hard. We feel very confident about this race. We know we're going to win this race, and we're going to win this race by a substantial amount. However, I never take anything for granted. I don't want to look back and think that I didn't work hard enough or I didn't do enough. So we're visiting the counties, every county in the state. We're trying to visit all 44 counties. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to all 44, but
Where do you stand now?
We're about 35 right now, and we're pretty
close. With a week to go.
With a week to go. So I'm doing everything I can. I'm talking to as many people. We have TV ads. We have things online. We're doing everything we can to win this election, and I invite everybody to go to our website, labrador2022.com. They can communicate with us. They can talk to us, and we're pretty approachable, and we're having a wonderful time.
Well, best wishes leading up to November 8th. Thank you for your time today and explaining your thoughts and your positions as you hope to be Idaho's next Attorney General.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome very much. Well, I'm going to take a quick 2-minute break. I'll be back with early voting information and where you can find information on what will be on your specific ballot. Stay with us. And finally, today I'd like to remind you once again that early voting is underway in counties across Idaho. Early voting locations in Ada County include Boise City Hall, the Ada County Elections Office, Meridian City Hall, and Eagle City Hall. That mobile voting unit will also be out and about at various locations ahead of Election Day. In Canyon County, early voting taking place at the Canyon County Elections Office in Caldwell. In Elmore County, you can vote early at the courthouse. In Payette County, at the County Clerk's Office, and Adams County at the courthouse as well. Early voting runs through November 4th. On Election Day, polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And for more early voting locations, we couldn't list them all on that graphic. You can also get information on absentee ballots and what's going to be on your ballot specifically simply by texting the word VOTE to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. We will send you a link. You can also find our voter guide on KTVB.com. Plus, you can watch all of our interviews with the candidates for U.S. Senate, Lieutenant Governor, and Attorney General on our website as well. That is all of our time for this week's Viewpoint. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you tonight on the Sunday News at 4:30 and 10 p.m. and then right back here next Sunday morning for another Viewpoint. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.